so I can jump up and show something on the slides.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Václav Havel Library. I am pleased to welcome also our two distinguished guests. Thanks for coming. And I would like also to thank our partners, the organization Lidská, práva, hranic, in English, Human Rights Without Borders, for bringing them here to the Czech Republic and here to the Václav Havel Library. For those of you who are here for the first time, I would like to inform you that we organize English events at least once a month. The next one will take place on the 30th of March, and it will be a discussion with Pavel Fischer and Jiří Šitler, two friends of Václav Havel and diplomats. You can find more information in our program here. Now I give the floor to the moderator, Kateřina Šafaříková, and I wish you a nice evening.
Good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Kateřina Šafaříková. I'm a journalist. I work with the Czech daily Lidové noviny, and I'll be your host for this evening that I hope will enjoy. The topic of this evening is the organ harvesting in China and China human rights and road, and I have two special guests with me, so let me introduce that to you. First, on my left hand is Mr. David Kilgour, Canadian, former Canadian Secretary of State for Asia and Pacific, and also a long-time member of the Canadian Parliament. Second on my left is Mr. Gutmann, who is American, journalist and writer, and also author of a book on the illegal organ harvesting in China. Now, what I suggest is that we will go through the very topic of the two gentlemen engaging ones, and we would discuss for about roughly 45 minutes, and obviously then I give you the floor so you can ask a question you might want to ask. So, I just present shortly the book or the report that David Kilgour together with David Matas, who is a human rights lawyer, they wrote. It's called Bloody Harvest, and it's a report into allegation of organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners in China. Now, the interesting thing about this report is that it was presented in 2007, and if we say an independent investigation led by two Westerners in communist enclosed China, obviously, then it leads to a question: how can you lead an independent investigation of such a thing in China, being a Westerner? So I would like to ask David, also then Ethan, if you could give us some details about the methodology. How did you lead the investigation?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm embarrassed that that's the first question that's being asked, because it's probably going to be one. And all the questions are going to be that tough? Well, you're next. No, ladies and gentlemen, everyone speaks English? I don't have to speak in Czech? Do you want me to speak in Czech?
He's very proud of his Czech.
So everyone here speaks English? Is that one of the rules?
Do you? Both of you? English?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, well, yes, methodology was a very important problem that we had to deal with. We actually applied, David Matus and I applied for a visa to go to China, and that was quite a funny story involving that, which I won't bore you with, but they didn't give us visas to go to China, so we had to use other sources. The first thing, I was a prosecutor for 10 years, so I'm supposed to know something about evidence and proof. And in fact, we found 52 kinds of proof that this horrible crime against humanity was going on. But there are a lot of skeptics out there, and people would say, well, I don't like proof number 20, or I don't like proof number 33. And some media were quite skeptical about our proof, how strong it was. To give you one of the 52, in fact, practically the first person we talked to was a woman who was using the name Annie, living near Washington, and I went down and interviewed her, and she told me that her husband had removed the corneas from the eyes of 2,000 Falun Gong practitioners between 2001 and 2003. And so that became one of our bases of proof. And I think the argument is over now. I really do. About a day after our first report came out, Kateřina, they put out a statement in the embassy saying, these guys have got 3 cities in the wrong provinces. Can you imagine? That's the only statement they could come up with. Yes, it's true. We had misidentified the location of 3 cities in 3 provinces where this terrible thing was going on. So we immediately corrected the location of these 3 cities, and that's about the only, quote, substantive thing the government of China has been able to say. They accuse us of being anti-China. We're not anti-China. Those of you who were at the other meeting, we are strongly for the people of China, for the history of China, for the cultures. But we've discovered over the last, years now, that they don't even argue anymore that we didn't have proof. In fact, they now admit, Wang Jiefu, the former Deputy Minister of Health, admits that 95% of the organs are coming from prisoners. And what he doesn't admit is that the word Falun Gong never comes out of his mouth. He always says prisoners. I think it's probably safe to say, and Ethan will have something to say about this, that some places, all the so-called donors are Falun Gong prisoners who were simply taken out of a forced labor camp over to a makeshift operating room, and their kidney, liver, and so on are taken from them. They're of course dead, and the organs are taken to Shanghai, where they're transplanted into the bodies of people from the West.
Then sorry to jump in.
Yeah, no, do please. I can go on.
So what I meant is, how does it happen that a Canadian gets in touch with a Chinese person who is ready to retell the story, who is ready to witness?
Sure.
So that technicality.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we had to use interpreters. In fact, again, we were very careful because we knew if we made the slightest error, we'd get blasted. So we hired an independent interpreter to go over the transcripts. You're aware of that. We had people phoning into China, speaking, of course, Chinese, and then the transcripts were made, and then we had to make sure that what, say, the hospital official in Hospital X was saying was what we had in our transcript. So we... so
you were thinking an interest into buying an organ, right?
Yes, exactly. You obviously know. Yeah, that went on a lot. And we found 15 institutions across China, which are in our book, that admitted they were doing it. In fact, in some cases, they even said, we have Falun Gong practitioners here waiting for you.
That's what they said, the Chinese officials?
Well, a couple of them did, yes.
Yes.
Those are in their report. So yes, that was the second kind of evidence, but there are 50 other kinds if you're not satisfied with the one you just raised.
Maybe another thought for Ethan. You led an interview with over 100%, right? Witness that the interviews are in your book that is called Slaughter. The slaughter is here on the table. So Ethan, what is your take on the methodology on finding the evidence and talking to the witnesses?
Well, I want to address your implicit point of I did not conduct this investigation in China. Now, I want to make it clear, I lived in China for a number of years, and I did business in China. I make my fortune in China. No. But I did, actually. I did pretty well in business in China, actually, by my standards anyway. And I wrote my first book, really, basically in China. And, but something happened in the very beginning of this. I had determined that, I wasn't thinking about organ harvesting, I was determined that I was going to do a book about Falun Gong and its conflict with the Chinese state, because I thought this was a great story that people weren't really covering very well, and it was obviously the sort of #1 issue in China. I thought Falun Gong practitioners were correct about this. Very early on, I got a call from a woman who was involved in this investigation, Falun Gong practitioner, and I'm not going to name her here, but it's somebody both me and David know her pretty well. And she said there's somebody in China, witness, wants to talk about organ harvesting in hospitals. This is shortly after, I think it's right around the time that the Epoch Times had put out the first article, this was a rather sensational article. I think maybe your investigation was certainly in full swing at that point, and maybe just about to be published. So I said, well, why not? She said, well, do you want to be on the phone call? And I said, well, yeah, okay, I'll get on the phone as well. She was going to do this anyways. Well, that guy had an interesting story about a hospital in Guangzhou. Some very strong evidence about organ harvesting. And we said goodnight, and he got off the phone, and nobody has ever heard from him since. He had a family, his children. It is not my responsibility as a journalist to go into China and get people killed. Okay, I don't care how important this investigation is. I will not live with that guilt. And so I said, look, this is, this is not about grandstanding. This is about getting evidence. And the best kind of evidence I can get is human-to-human evidence. Well, it turns out there are plenty of refugees out there, but people don't bother to interview them. Okay, they're all over the place. Bangkok, there was over 100 Falun Gong practitioners. Not one of them had been interviewed by journalists. They've been interviewed internally.
What year are we talking roughly? 2007, 8? Or when was it? When was it? Yeah.
Oh, that was 2008. So in 2008, I mean, there they are. Now they're all waiting to be sent somewhere for asylum and so forth. And they have, in some cases, a few families. Nobody had talked to these people. It wasn't just Falun Gong. There were Uyghurs all over the world. They followed the Turkic pattern of migration. You're probably aware of that. Which means they mainly go to Germany and they don't have to Peter or Czech so much. But I don't mean to put down reporters. They're under the gun. Everybody knows the economics of reporting these days. It's deadly. It's horrible. But these are people who need to be interviewed. Now it turns out that Falun Gong are some of the hardest to interview subjects I've ever had. Not because they're Falun Gong, but because they're Chinese. Okay? They're mainland Chinese, and this means they lie as they breathe, okay? Or at least they spin as they breathe. The assumption is you're a stupid Westerner, you're not going to get it anyways, and they just give you some spin. But my experience was that if you just spent long enough, you just stayed at it for a day and a half, 2 days. By the end, almost like a psychiatrist session, suddenly they tell you the whole thing, okay, in the last 5 minutes. So those are some of the pressures, and I think David's certainly experienced some of those too, and I know David Manas has. So there are difficulties in this, and I think that's one of the other things that slows journalists down in this area, is the difficulty of there are cultural differences, and there are issues of trust. And there are tremendous issues of trust, particularly for people coming out of the maelstrom of a totalitarian country.
What did they have to do to earn your trust? I mean, if there was a Chinese right sitting in front of you, obviously you had your doubts, right?
Yeah, no, that's the essence of what I did. Of course, but the advantage was that I did not feel like I had to use an interview. If I felt somebody was just spinning me and telling me what they thought I wanted to know or needed to know, I would simply throw the interview out. There are a lot of interviews which just ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, this is the way it has to be. There weren't that many interviews. In general, I found that Falun Gong have an ethical commandment, really, to be honest and be truthful. Now, that does not mean that they are perfectly truthful, but it does mean that sometimes, again, mainly mainland practitioners, because they're coming out of China, there's a kind of Rumpelstiltskin process. Okay? You've got to ask exactly the right question to get in there. You've got to kind of corner them. If I felt like that went on too long, or it was too, I really wasn't getting it, then I kind of would sometimes back off and throw it out. But that was actually, now that I think about it, it was very rare. Most of the time, I felt like you could get to something with somebody. And my problem later on, as I did these interviews, because that's a lot of interviews, it became something else. It became that I'd heard it all before. And this is a really frightening thing, is, I talk about, I accuse the world of compassion fatigue. Well, I've got plenty of it myself. I mean, there were moments there where I just be like, oh, so you're in labor camp. Yeah, they tortured you. I mean, it's really, at that point, I started thinking, this is time to stop doing this and start writing. So those are some of the hazards of the pure field research method. I don't do pure field research, but pretty close. Those are the hazards.
Just one last thing on that topic. When you had your interviews ready, was it difficult to find an edition house in England or in the United States to actually print it, or did people trust you on that? If you said, okay, this is happening in China, here it is, print it.
I got a comment on that. When we decided to publish the book, maybe I shouldn't name the publisher, but it's one of the largest publishers in the United States, and they looked at the book and they... No,
Yes, name it.
I don't want to publish again with them, no. They looked at the book and the editorial people were all for publishing it. They went up to the business people and the business people said, no, we're not going to publish that book. So we finally got a small publisher in Canada to publish it, and actually the woman did a very good job.
Seraphin's a great publisher. They're a boutique publisher. Look, I had horrendous problems publishing. Okay,
Where, in the West? I mean,
yeah, in the West. I had put out cover story after cover story on this issue. People understood that as a magazine function, it worked very well. The idea of a book, the feeling was this will not, this just isn't going to make any money. That was the assumption. Now, I think that changed, and it partly a book that probably was going to be called something more like The Resistance or the Struggle or something like this became The Slaughter. And probably, if anybody reads this book will quickly see that, you know, there's a huge section in the middle which isn't about organ harvesting exactly at all. It's really just about how the original premise of the book. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this conflict get so out of control? And I mean, to do that, you have to tell very personal stories. And of course, that's really what excites me. But yes, publishers were very hard. On the other hand, maybe I just had terrible agents because I finally got the right agent and she got it in a month. So maybe it comes down to something as simple as that. And
the book is fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. How many of you have read it by any chance? Anybody had a chance to read it? Okay, it's coming out in Czech in... do you want to make... Oh, you should make the announcement.
No, that's the thing. This is probably one of the translators. It's coming out in Czech. We hope to have it out by the end of the summer, early fall, for the Christmas season.
A basic question to both of you that I'm sure you have been asked about a zillion times, but I'm going to ask it anyways. I think it's necessary. The question is why the Chinese regime was so fearful of the Falun Gong, because there is nothing that to be known about Falun Gong trying to start a political revolution, a coup d'etat against the Chinese regime. So why they were so frightened because of that?
Go ahead. You want to go first?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's got a different answer to some extent, though I think we all agree on certain things, which is Falun Gong was big. It's 70 to 100 million. My estimate is more like 70 million based on the internal Chinese government figures, but we don't really know. It was the Chinese Communist Party is about 65 million, so okay, there's a bigness. There's also the point that they had taken other Qigong movements, like Zhonggong, and they had destroyed them in a couple of months, 2 months. Just destroyed a 30 million membership list, gone. Okay,
tell them how
well, they went after them in a number of ways. There was much more of a financial, Falun Gong doesn't have really a financial basis. So with Zhonggong, you remove the financial, it was a bit more of a pay-as-you-go kind of church. But the founder of Zhonggong was killed in a very strange traffic accident in my country a few years later. Now, the Falun Gong, so part of the assumption was they could do it quickly. They could probably take this out fast. But I think the largest point, and I think that this is really what separates out Falun Gong, and why I thought it was interesting to write about Falun Gong, was that it wasn't just an exercise movement at all, that it had these very strong moral principles, compassion, truth, and forbearance, and that the people really worked very hard to live by these principles. Now those principles, if you've lived in China, are very different than the principles of the new China, okay, the China that is going to take over the world, okay? This, you know, compassion to them meant that you couldn't really make a deal, and certainly telling the truth means you can't make a deal. And finally, forbearance, I mean, that just means letting other people take advantage of you. Now China wants to be in a position of taking advantage of other people. That's very clear. And so I think for Communist Party cadres, particularly the ones who are nationalists, this was the issue. That this movement did pose a threat as far as they were concerned. It didn't matter how many times practitioners said, we're not political, we're not even a religion, we're not an organization. This was the standard response in China. And they could say, we don't even have a membership list. But where there were no membership lists, the Chinese state security agents invented them. You know, for one of the most important women, from my understanding of this investigation, I hope I have a picture. There we go. This is Ding Jing, and she...
Ethan, take the microphone. Here.
Sorry. This is Ding Jing. She was she's a Falun Gong practitioner in Beijing. She was a postal secretary, and she had retired, and she got interested. She walked through the park, and she'd see people doing Qigong, and then she started doing Falun Gong after a while. And she got very invested in it, and she actually ran 3 practice sites. This is wrong. She was allowed to teach the exercises. That's a slight privilege, but it wasn't a huge one, didn't pass no big test, but basically you had a little bit of trust. They said you can teach the exercises, and she kept the sites tidy and clean.
No pay, she didn't know.
No pay. And then she had a boombox, so she could play some music when they were doing the exercises and so forth. Now, her sites were 3 ones. The first one was for China Central Television, which is the propaganda. Okay, so this is the propaganda arm right there. China Central Television, tons of people spilling out of that building to do the exercises. The other was for the Public Security Bureau of China. This is the FBI, this is the Gestapo, this is the, okay, and big, packed exercise site, Beijing, making sure it's going okay. And the third one was for top-ranking Chinese Communist Party officials, probably including Li Bang's wife. All right, she is such a kind woman, she really is, that she didn't even reveal that, because I don't think she wanted to get somebody in trouble. This picture's taken of her in a hospital. She's getting pretty old right now, but this is a rather sensational story to me. This was a key to my understanding of why this threatened the Chinese Communist Party. Because from their perspective, Falun Gong had infiltrated the whole thing. And not only had infiltrated, but this is the Marxist method of seizure of power, starting with those peasants, right? And then going all the way up. And that is how Marxists seize power, is you do it on many different levels, especially the military, and then you end up with the Communist Party. And so I think from that perspective, to me, it's not that big a mystery. Okay.
Still a basic question, why the organ harvesting anyways? I mean, if I am a dictator right now, want to get rid of my potential opposition, I think I would take those people, put them into work camps, force them to work 25 hours a day, but do I really have to take their organs out? Was it so that the transportology was on hype in China at the beginning of 2000, or why?
Well, I guess the short answer to that would be that when Mao was running the country, hospital service, medical service were basically free. When Deng Xiaoping came along in '78, he basically said that the medical system had to work on cash. Now, it's true that there are people insured in China today, but it's roughly about $2,000 a year for health insurance, or so I'm told, in China. So it's a big chunk of people's income. A lot of people are not insured. They have to pay cash at the hospitals. This affected the income of the doctors, and the organ trafficking, pillaging became a major source of income for the medical profession. That, coupled with what you were saying about not liking the values of Falun Gong, bluntly, ladies and gentlemen, if Ethan is a Falun Gong practitioner and he's sold for parts, as awful as that sounds, he's worth about $500,000.
Maybe not me.
No, all right.
Somebody a little younger.
Okay.
How about this guy there?
And the amazing thing is, you probably know, is that the people that would phone up, we found this in our book, people would phone up saying, I want a Falun Gong practitioner. Don't smoke, don't drink, healthy. So And then you've got this wonderful story that talk about international politics. Can you tell them about Dr. Coe briefly?
Well, I can. And so I'd kind of like to lead off with this other point. You've got, I mean, from my perspective at least, this was sort of organic. I mean, you go from execution grounds like this one, this is back in the 80s, early 90s, based on the uniforms, and you go to, these become the new executioners. And yes, that is the story here that we're trying to dig up. How did this happen? How did you get to doctors? And these are human organs that got in here. And this picture was taken to actually encourage organ donation, which is why we have it at all. But the one stop along the way is this breakdown in medical ethics, and it takes over time. So in the 80s, you start harvesting prisoners, okay, for their organs. You're not doing it on a mass scale, but they started, it was mainly kidneys, and then they start perfecting the liver operation. And by the time it's 1995, this man, surgeon, Dr. Enver Tonti, who's a Uyghur surgeon in northwest China, is told to go out and he goes to an execution ground and they shoot a bunch of people, and one of them they shoot on this side, and he's told to remove the kidneys and liver. He said, what do you mean? This man is still alive. And they said, that's the point. Do it now. Do it quickly. So he does. He cuts out the liver and the kidneys. The man's heart is still beating. He knows this because the blood is pulsing. And he stitches it back up, and he probably forgets about it until just a few years ago when he came out with this. Now, this isn't just some sort of confession. I mean, this guy has just testified in Brussels and in Glasgow, in Edinburgh. He's the real thing. Well, that's kind of bracketed by Dr. Coe, who I didn't bring a picture with because I was avoiding showing pictures of Dr. Coe for a little while. Because the man was in an election story. That's another story, too long for this audience, but he was in an election campaign. He's now mayor of Taipei, or will become president of Taipei. But the basic story, and he's verified this story, and I have to, you can go online and see all the emails between us to verify everything I'm saying, is he, in 2004, 2005, he goes to China. It was perfectly legal back then. He's a Taiwanese doctor. He goes and looks into organ harvesting. Got a lot of elderly patients in his clinic. And he meets with the doctors and they basically say, look, we like you. We're not only going to give you the Chinese price, which is about half, so $30,000 for a kidney, $30,000 US for a kidney, it's close to 60,000. But, you know, we've heard your concerns about these prisoners, that they have hepatitis, that they have drug addiction, that they're sexual diseases. And so we're going to give you all phone cards, just like Aaron was suggesting. They don't drink, they don't smoke. And we do appreciate your discretion. And he was discreet, though he did try to change this within the system by himself. But eventually, in 2008, he gave me an interview. And it's as close as I come to the movies, where somebody just sort of breaks down and it's the whole thing. Now, those are
so do you still follow his whereabouts of this man, maybe the interview where
I said he's mayor of Taipei.
Oh.
He's just been elected. He's elected mayor of Taipei. He'll probably be president of Taipei. If I lived in Taiwan, I'd support that. I think very highly of him. I really do. And I think he's actually done a huge service to this investigation. Now, I'm not sure his opponents wanted us to fight and kill each other very badly. That's another story. I think the point is we have doctors that begin to bracket this, but among that, I mean, obviously is Andy. I mean, you've got the wife of a doctor who actually performed this operation as well as that we have a surgeon from China, this one. But this is Wang Lijun. He was one of the top police chiefs in China. He was he worked directly under Bo Xilai, who was almost president of China. Came very close. He ran a clinic in Jilin City, which harvested, he was given an award for this, thousands of people, prisoners. They don't tell you what kind of prisoners. And he was personally given the award for his lethal injection method. And in his awards ceremony, he said this was found very moving to see the life slip out of one person into another. Now, so I think that ends another question. Did the top leadership know about this?
Yeah, just what I want to ask.
Well, I mean, it's a little bit like if we go back to the Bush administration and Condi Rice was running, maybe not Condi Rice, but maybe her direct assistant was running a chop shop like this, and you'd say Bush doesn't know. It's ludicrous. Of course, everybody knew on some level. Was everybody involved? No, probably everybody wasn't getting money out of it. But I think the idea that in a surveillance state like China, believe me, the military gets watched, policemen get watched, party members get watched, and this is what this picture represents. The fact that we have it at all is very important, and that comes neither from me nor David Modest. This comes directly from Falun Gong investigators, and it's absolutely legitimate.
He's the guy that tried to defect to the Americans.
Yes, I mean, he's actually quite famous because he tried to defect in the American embassy. It's a long story that's of interest to China hands, but I think we can see why that defection was so dangerous.
What was the pretext on which the Falun Gong practitioners were arrested anyways? I mean, if I am the Falun Gong practitioner and what's happening in between me being arrested and then me being taken on a surgeon table?
That's a fascinating issue. One of the paramount principles of Falun Gong is truth. So if a policeman would walk up to you and say, "Are you a Falun Gong practitioner?" 9 times out of 10, or 10 times out of 10, you say yes. And then you go right to one of these work camps. Now, you could get out. We talked to a number of people who did get out. I'm thinking of one woman whose husband was a diplomat in Paris. She's a practitioner. When this war was declared, in effect, she went down to the embassy in Paris and said, I want you to stop doing this. Falun Gong are good, decent people. Anyway, she was eventually sent home, of course, to China. I think she went to jail 3 times. And finally, basically, she capitulated. She said, I won't practice Falun Gong anymore. And I think partly because her husband was a diplomat, they let her go, and she left. He divorced her, by the way, or did divorce her, and so she's now living in the States, and she's remarried. But no, that was the thing. Finally, as I understand it, the practitioners stopped saying, yes, I'm a practitioner. They started refusing to answer the question or something, but it's been a huge problem for them. This truth, they really do practice truth.
And one of the problems in that, so that they, one of the things that made Falun Gong practitioners very vulnerable was because the harassment of their families, in some cases, entire families would end up in labor camp or in some kind of detention. So it came to the point where some Falun Gong practitioners, many actually, would start, they'd ask them, what's your name? And they'd say Falun Gong practitioner or Datha disciple. And they'd say, well, where are you from? What's your province? And they'd say, the cosmos. Now, you know, that's almost a funny story, except that what happened to these people is they're all not. I mean, there's one woman, I had interviewed one woman out of this 120 who was a nameless one, as we call it, in China, and they all were given numbers, by the way.
4-digit numbers.
4-digit numbers.
Anybody?
And she was one of those numbers, I forget what her number was, and she did make it out, but she's about 80. She was about 80, so her organs were useless. It's the only one I've ever met who survived. We know there are thousands and thousands of these kinds of practitioners. And, you know, even in China, there is some kind of meager social protection offered by the fact that you have family members looking around for you, knocking on doors. And those were gone. So this is one of the most disturbing aspects of this, is this, that simply we can't find these people.
Has China ever acknowledged what the system, the country was doing? Since I've noted that China announced she will stop the organ harvesting from prisoners, so logically meaning that...
Which announcement?
The one that they stopped.
Yeah.
Well, which one? I mean, they made about 5 or 10 of these things. I mean, they seem to make one every month. And Reuters and AP, you know, puts it out as if it's news. I can't figure it out. I wish I could do that. I'll just keep repeating myself every month, and they'll write a story. How do they do this? I mean, you know, there's nothing. You want to see the picture that got banned from my book? This is fine. Yeah, I do. I do. There. Oh, this is the only picture. This was too controversial for my book. Okay? My publisher was too worried that we get sued. Oh, we tried to run it through this man. This is Francis Delmonico. He's the head of the Transplantation Society. It's the most respected, you know, it's the Transplantation Society. It represents all the West. This was on his website. You know, my publisher made the mistake of not just publishing it as a screenshot. But that's not it. This is Wang Jifu. He runs the transplant, I mean, he runs it all in China. He's the one who keeps declaring that it's over and finished. They were trying to make a deal here. They did it for 2 years. They played this game where that, you know, China's ending it, ending it. It's a police state. They could have ended it any time. But, you know, they sort of dragged it out. This is the other guy, the main guy, and these are a couple of Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong guys in the act on open bar night. But the point is that they, you know, when they were getting close to the point where they were going to celebrate, Wang Jifu quietly gave an interview to a reporter and said, yeah, we're actually going to keep harvesting prisoners' organs forever. But they're not going to be prisoner organs anymore. They're going to be organ donors. That now we've just made prisoners, turn them all into organ donors if they want to be. So this is where we're at. I don't know what else to say about it. You know, that,
So basically, it's no change in that sort of policy or.
I mean, it does show they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed, right?
Well,
You say that?
Yeah, they call the labor camps are now called detoxification centers in some places at least. Can you imagine?
I mean, the problem I mean, I'm the one who really goes nuts over this, but, you know, the problem that drives me crazy about this is for 2 years, we were doing some very, you know, making some real headway with Western governments, because government agencies have to read materials, and they read our stuff, and they go, wait a minute, this is really very persuasive. We were doing very well. We had added steam going into this, and along comes the Transplantation Society. For 2 years, really the whole thing simmered, the pot stopped boiling. And, you know, at the end of 2 years, we're left with nothing, okay? Because this guy came into China and didn't really negotiate. He didn't negotiate a verification regime. We were just supposed to trust that the Chinese were going to stop this, even though this man, Wang Jifu, may be very powerful, but he has no jurisdiction over the military hospitals whatsoever, which are doing the 90% of the organ harvesting in the country. So from our perspective, well, at least from my perspective, this was, you know, this is a minor, it's an accessory crime against humanity here, okay? The point is, these people have no moral right to be absolving China in the first place. So, you know, only the families can do that. And so we have a real difficulty here. And I think even Francis Delmonico actually feels terrible.
So basically, the very enemy, it's not the very Chinese regime, but it's the interest of the Western companies into doing business with China, since it brings a lot of money. I mean, the transportology, right?
Well, I guess
It doesn't, by the way. I guess you heard this last night. Peter Navarro, who has a PhD from Harvard, has written a book in which he and Jean Greg Autry point out that I want to get this right, 24 million US jobs have been lost in the last 20 years, manufacturing jobs, as about 50,000 factories have closed down in the US. I don't know how many factories have closed down in the Czech Republic, but I can tell you a lot have closed down in Canada. And why you or your government would want to cause people to lose jobs here is beyond me. I think what you want to do is you want to create jobs. You all know very well that the economies that are doing well, Germany and South Korea and so on, and China, know that the manufacturing sector is vital. And Canada is in the position where we have to try to rebuild ours now quickly. And the US, you still speak for the US?
Not when you're here.
The U.S. has been, well, we've all been so stupid about this that we, Firestone Tires had 850 jobs making tires near Montreal. They closed them down, moved the plant to China, and the transportation agency in Washington said the tires coming out of China are dangerous. I mean, are you going to do the same, go down the same road in the Czech Republic that countries like the US and Canada have gone? I certainly hope
Well,
not.
we are already there. Our government supports the free trade, and yeah.
I remember when TRW came to me very, very quietly in Nijeg and said, they're starting, you know, we don't really actually have even a factory. We had a factory to make some minor part of it. But we found a bunch of airbags a whole lot of airbags that are suddenly coming into the market. They're fakes, they're counterfeit.
But I think
Airbags, counterfeit airbags. Can you imagine if one of these things had failed? Airbags have never failed, right? This is TRW's entire reputation on the line. And the truth is, we couldn't really help them. Now, I don't know how they stopped it. Maybe they shot some people. I don't know. I mean, whatever you have to do, but this was such a dangerous situation. Can you imagine for a company like that?
yeah, but let's sort of put the, I'd say, a business as usual or the trade with China concerning technical goods aside. This is the organ harvesting is something different. Now, my question is, have you managed to press on a government or society company so that the company or the state even would sort of prevent companies from dealing with China when it comes to organs?
Well, you know, the answer is we haven't. Peter Navarro, his book, and it's called Death by China, points out that the way the Chinese companies capture places like Canada and the US is they cheat. One example that relates to what we're talking about are these forced labor camps, where they have about at least 350 of them. They produce, we've talked to people who've got out of these camps, ladies and gentlemen, and they tell us they've been made things like Christmas decorations, McDonald's, those little toys at McDonald's, of course all kinds of garments, a whole range of products which they produce and then they go to a subcontractor and the subcontractor sells them to McDonald's or somebody. And this is the US government has an agreement that they won't use goods made by forced labor. They don't bother to enforce it. The rest of us don't even have an agreement, although the WTO bars goods made by forced labor.
I think it's just a terribly difficult problem. I mean, you know, with Cisco, we knew full well that Cisco had handed over surveillance technologies to the Chinese. And it's in this book too. We're not only, you know, it's kind of funny actually. The publisher asked me to just put it in the footnote, so you can figure it out for yourself. It basically gives you a bunch of links to go to. The company, Cisco was handing over direct technology, which was actually used to create the Falun Gong database. So they're actually hunting people down with this, and Cisco was doing upgrades on a weekly basis on this thing. Okay, so did Cisco ever leave China? No, it wasn't really kicked out of China. Then we couldn't even do it, even though we had put a law in the books that after Tiananmen that we could sell no crime detection instruments to China. We had that law, but it was so. The Chamber of Commerce decided to interpret this as, well, you can't sell, you know, direct police equipment, whistles or truncheons or something. I don't know if right. The point is, but we have seen some progress in some places. Google did move out of China just because they were simply too embarrassed. So I believe that, you know, embarrassment can be the most powerful tool. The don't be evil slogan. So they actually operated on it. Now, did they fully operate on it, or did it still have some residue in China? Yes, they do, of course. It's not perfect. But it sent a very powerful signal to the Chinese people that somebody out there cares about you on some level. Because Google was incredibly popular in China. And that you're not in the mainstream. So I think all those are ways we can think about this. Now, on the other hand, Roche, which we know is a company that is actually doing testing drugs on transplant patients in China, on the mainland of China, to make a profit, has not been stopped, even though they've taken tremendous heat from it. How do you say Roche? Roche is pronounced differently here, isn't it?
Roche.
The Roche, okay. So they took tremendous abuse. They were voted the worst company in the world in several human rights conferences, but they still kept doing it. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is there. I've thought about this a lot, and we're still far from a real solution. I think with the organ harvesting thing, it's a little easier because there isn't a company setting up, other than Chinese companies, there isn't really a Western company setting up this stuff. There's this Chinese company here. They were on the web until just 6 months ago. It was our favorite party trick, right? We'd go and do a talk, and we'd say, call up this name on your smartphone. Everybody would call out their smartphone, and they'd go, oh my God, this is an organ broker in China. Well, this was up for several years. The government had stopped anything in China. They didn't stop this. Okay? They allowed a very positive book to be written about somebody, Larry's kidney. A very funny book in America about somebody getting a kidney for their cousin. Okay? China is in business. They're still in business in this area.
But has the scope of the illegal harvesting, organ harvesting, reduced since, at least?
No.
Okay.
This woman is 56. She just came out not that long ago. She's my age. She's a very credible witness. She's in Sydney now. And she was given an organs-only examination. That is something aimed exclusively at her organs, at her kidney and her heart and liver, and even corneas, along with 500 other prisoners on a single day. Most of them were Falun Gong in May 2013. Now, okay, you can say, well, you don't have something from May 2014. Don't worry. There will be something soon enough. This is the pattern. The pattern is every time I was writing this book, I thought I was writing history. I was convinced of it. I was annoyed when Falun Gong practitioners would go, Ethan, why don't you finish your book? I'd be like, you know, I was wrong. I mean, this wasn't history. This is history still being written. And we just heard that ISIS has started to organize ISIS last week. They've started harvesting people too. We've discovered a bunch of corpses which are missing kidneys and livers. So, and doctors who were apparently coerced to do so, or were challenged to do so. This stuff is spreading. That's the unfortunate part. And we're not talking about people selling a kidney to get their kid through college. We're talking about, you know, a genocide, really.
Is it so because there are still too many people interested into buying organs? Since if we look on the sort of a broader human rights map of China, one can say that the international pressure has worked for some. Look at celebrities like Ai Weiwei and the others. There are many others like him who, because of the new media and the international interest coming with, obviously, the interest of business, they are safe now, or some of the harsh practices have been sort of stopped. Why is it so that the organ harvesting is still on high? Because of, we just need it?
Yeah, Ai Weiwei, I'm glad you mentioned him. He's one of my heroes, but can I just, maybe it doesn't really fit with your question, but you should all know this. A lot of you do. Liu Zhao, who's the wife of the Nobel Peace Prize winner, has been under house arrest, ladies and gentlemen, for more than 4 years. No access to email, mail, or phone. Her offense, of course, is she's married to the only Nobel Peace Prize winner that China's ever had, who's still in custody, as I'm sure you know. She's had a recent heart attack, depression. Beijing asserts preposterously that she's under no legal restraints. Can you imagine? Anyway, and then we could talk about Gao Zhisheng. It's just inhuman that. And by the way, I was in Norway not long ago, and somebody told me, and I think knows, that the Chinese ambassador in Oslo went to every cabinet minister in the government of Norway at the time and said, don't give the Nobel Peace Prize to Liu Xiaobo. And you know what his crime is? He advocated the Charter of 108, which I gather was closely paralleled after Charter 77 hereby in this country. And this guy is lingering and languishing in prison, and his wife is suffering all kinds of things. Can some of you write to your MPs or write to Amnesty or somebody or write a story about this? This poor thing that's I get excited about this. This poor tragedy that's taking place. And Gao Zhisheng is another one that. How many of you know about who Gao Zhisheng is? Not too many? Well, thank you.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, but still, before we continue further.
I don't quite understand your question, please.
Well, I was asking, why is it so that the organ harvesting, it's still, well, it's not being very much.
It's not talked about.
It's not talked about.
Well,
It's not being reduced. Why is it so?
Yeah, David's got good hair. I don't know. I think it's part of the glamour thing. Look, I think Falun Gong has had a lot of problems, particularly in Hollywood from the beginning. But some of them I think are quite defensible. Let me say why. Tibetans are incredibly popular, though they're actually being harvested too in the book. Falun Gong came over here. It's a mainland group. It's not a separate country. They had their own people from right within China. And as I said, they had this difficulty because they couldn't even define themselves when they came over, because they were so used to trying to stay under the radar in China already and say we're not a religion, we're not an organization, we're not political. So it was very hard for them to find alliances within Western society, and they had very little experience in how to do it. The Tibetans got tremendous support, which they promptly used, tremendous amounts of money as well. I mean, I'm not criticizing them, you understand. But they used it, and they sold Tibet all over the world, except in one place, which is China. They did nothing in China. They had all these resources, and none of it was there. They had not a radio signal, not a TV station, nothing. What did Falun Gong do? It wasn't oriented towards the West, it was oriented towards China. They were trying to change Chinese public opinion. That's all they've been interested in doing to this day. The fact that, you know, Free China, that movie's out there, that is, it's an outlier. It's the exception that proves the rule. Most of their work is all done to beam in there. Sound of Hope Radio Network, which there's all kinds of obscure Chinese cities you've never heard about. New Tang Dynasty TV, even Shenyang, the performing show, in many ways is oriented towards China. It's to say, look, there's a different Chinese culture, right? We can do, you know, you want to do New Year's? We'll do New Year's 10 times better than you can. Okay, these are a lot of the issues, and so personally I find that exciting. Okay, personally I find that much more stimulating than going around trying to convince people in various capitals that, you know, you're trying to actually get into the DNA of China and change it. I think this is very profound. I think it's heroic. That's my opinion.
Just
So in a way, I don't apologize for the fact that Falun Gong has not been terribly successful at changing Western public opinion.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have our last chapter in our book, Bloody Harvest, argues that the values of Falun Gong, the truth, compassion, forbearance, are really more the values of China than the imported philosophy from Europe that's been practiced there. And somebody put it very humorously. I think it was a farmer in China said, "Karl Marx, that doesn't sound like a Chinese name to me." And of course it's true. Now you're probably saying to yourself, there is no Marxism in China anymore. But in fact, there's letter-rip robber baron capitalism operating for a lot of people in China. And you probably all know that at the last National People's Congress, there were 71 billionaires present. These are the people's representatives. And, you know, what a joke. But at the same time, you've got this crony capitalism deluxe operating in the economy. You've got Leninism operating in the government. So you've got this incredible mixture of.
It's pretty close to what National Socialism was trying to achieve but never could fully realize in some ways.
I intend on asking a question on the foreign companies pouring into China, basically sort of harvesting on the cannibal capitalism of China. But still, as I promised, now the floor is yours. So whoever wants to ask a question to my special guest.
Comments. We don't need questions, comments. We really like comments.
No comments on it.
Yeah, but I'm journalist, so I like questions.
Okay.
Yes, I have a question, comment a little bit. You said the Chinese officials, Chinese government are most corrupted. They are starting to now cooperate with Czech government, and do you think that corruption of Czech government is going to be higher because of influence of Chinese corrupted officials?
Say it. This is a free.
Yeah, sitting here in the Havel Library, I mean, it's.
You have to be through. You can't lie. This is forbidden. Here.
Yeah, we've had problems with, this should encourage you, we've had problems with our government in Canada. Mr. Harper originally said, you probably heard this, he was not going to take the almighty buck in order to do unethical business with China. Fortunately, since 2009, things have gone the other way, including allowing them to take over probably our most ethical oil company, Exxon. But I think, by the way, something like 74% of Canadians disapproved of that takeover. And I think right now, if you look at some of the polls coming out in Canada, it's about 2/3 of Canadians are highly distrustful of the government of China. I don't know what it would be here, but I would, when I heard that your president said that you could learn things about social stability in China. I almost fell off my chair.
Want to say something? I'll go with yours.
Any follow-up to that question? No? Okay, I'm gonna ask. And it is basically a follow-up since, I don't know whether you all here know, but Ethan wrote another book, actually a first book about China, and the title reads Losing the New China. And it's basically a book about foreign companies coming to China, investing there, doing business there, and what is at stake, what are the compromises they have to make, what are the moral values, or just values they have to sort of shelve. Ethan, would you mind giving us some sort of a preview of what was the main verdict of your first book?
I mean, it's a much more naive book in a way. It was, you know, I a little more autobiographical, and I sort of come into China very excited about the prospect of capitalism's ability to change China, and the feeling that I'm going to be helping to build this great new country, and even this sort of shared future between the U.S. and China, where the world will turn to gold. You know, and it sort of goes through, you know, the signals along the way that this isn't going to go as planned. Now, and that is the premise of the book. It's fairly simple, just to say, you know, we have been thinking that it's just a question of getting some money in people's pockets out of great poverty, and then the democracy will follow. This sort of great wave of commercialism and everything else will sort of overwhelm this old rotting system, and it'll be followed by this not only wealth, but by a government that's responsive to its people. And that calculation is wrong. Or it turns out that at least something is going wrong, is what I said, is that the human rights seems to be going the other way. Now, Falun Gong, the reason why this caught the eyes of some Falun Gong practitioners was because a chapter was on Falun Gong, and a pretty strong chapter, sort of using that as an example of how this was really deteriorating. I saw Falun Gong getting rounded up in the streets. I was there when they banned it. Sound trucks appeared in the street. People in my office, Chinese women started crying. As I said at the time, I felt like I was witnessing an ugly family argument that I didn't want to be in the room. Somebody else's family. But the deeper problem is that it's taken businesses a long time to recognize that. And they put there's a lot of sunk costs. People go into China. They put the money in. It's worse than the money. It's the reputation. It's the reputation. It's that your stock prices suddenly are held up by this kind of, kind of an illusion, kind of a mirrored world out there in China. I mean, you want to talk about a mirrored world? Imagine what it was like during the dot-com boom there. We didn't even have, China wasn't even wired. And the amount of money you could get in China just by putting a .com next to Chinese mothers.com, boom, you know, billions of dollars invested. That was a very unrealistic world. There's a lot of examples of that all over the third world. The difference is that China is also a threat, and that China actually is big enough to absorb a lot of this stuff and then to make its own way. So I do not have all the answers. I think it was a kind of a precursor to this book, but it did give me a sensitivity that there was a larger story out there. Well, as I started doing this story, it shocked me. I mean, I did not expect things to deteriorate quite this far. I don't know, David, when you began the investigation on Bloody Harvest, I know you had certainly some suspicion that it might go like this, and you've been a China critic at some level for a while. But weren't you a little surprised at times?
Yeah, but I was so naive that I studied in Paris long before some of you were born. I had my little red Mao's book, and in those days, in the 70s, people would come every week. There'd be a new speaker coming to tell us what a wonderful man Mao was, and we'd just sit there. At least some of us would. We'd lap it up and we'd say, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is the great helmsman." And then when there's two, I don't know how many of you have read this book by Jime in Holiday on the Real Mao, 2005, where they point out, for example, that in peacetime,
70 million Chinese perished under Mao's rule in peacetime. So I guess maybe it was a guilty conscience that I had been so stupid as to believe a lot of this stuff coming out of China, that the more people that I talked to, Falun Gong, of course, included, but many others as well, it's just, and all this, I don't know whether your papers do it, I'm sure you don't do it, Catherine, but they go to China and they go to 17 banquets on a trade mission or something, and I was part of some of these things, I'm sorry to tell you.
We both were. We both had that extreme pleasure of just unbelievable red carpet being thrown our way. I mean, my last chapter was simply, it was called Rex in the City. It was about a character named, an expat named Rex, who's kind of good looking, and him having just endless sex. I mean, it was, people say it's not pornographic, it's awfully close. It's a kind of fantasy, it was kind of a fantasy land. In the sense it was the land of the last imperialist at that time. I think that's changed a little bit since the Beijing Olympics, but I think in a sense China has stood up and taken back its own country, if you want to look at it that way. But at what price? I mean, at a price of, since 2008, nobody can tell me human rights has gotten better. It's deteriorated dramatically.
One of the points you're making in your book, that Losing the New China, is that the representatives of the foreign American companies doing business in China, they had to lobby for Chinese interests in Washington. Can you give us maybe an example of that so that we can have some grasp of what was the thing they had to influence?
Well, I think within the internet they were all doing that. I mean, you know, it is not that, you know, Bill Clinton, you remember he was president for a while. He's a very clever guy, good with a phrase, but that phrase, trying to control the internet, would like be trying to nail Jell-O to the wall, did not come from him in his brow. It came from our industry people. We came up with that phrase. Okay, and it was handed over to him on a silver platter. And expats aren't so stupid. I mean, they're pretty good at this stuff. And basically, that was the arrangement that was being made. Well, you know, if we just, you give us a free hand in China, and we'll make, you know, we'll revolutionize this place, and we'll basically turn it into a democracy. That's what the internet will do. And look, to tell you the truth, I think there are plenty of expat businessmen who really feel that, who thought they were on that course. The problem is when something goes wrong, and you stop taking the evidence in, and this is where the problem is. Okay, when you start seeing that, wait a minute, we've just made a deal to handle the PSB's surveillance system, or we're Yahoo, and we just made a deal to not only censor all our internet here and our search engine, but we're also having to inform on a Chinese journalist, you know, and give his email to the Public Security Bureau of China. These are the problems that we've run into in Microsoft. You know, oh, we're being asked to give up our source code that we've never given up to anyone in the world. It's completely proprietary, and we're going to give it up to the Chinese. This is where you run into, we're an antivirus, and we're going to give the Chinese 30 examples of live computer viruses that are usually kept under complete lock and key because they need to examine them to see if our product works. Okay, these are problems. This is dangerous stuff, and the problem is that the expat, the businessman in China, does become disconnected from his home office. It's like the Chinese have a say: the emperor is high, and heaven is far away. You know, but it really is that we became disconnected from our own offices. We started selling this stuff out, and then the next thing, the thing that always goes, is human rights and American security. And we're reaping the fruits of that right now, I believe, in the Middle East.
Now, I had some constituents who invested $20 million in a pharmaceutical company near Beijing. In fact, the company was a going concern. It had 2,000 employees. And they put their savings and their friends up. What happened, though, that the company had been privatized, and the fellow who had been running the company was now the mayor of the adjoining city. So you can imagine what happened. Within 2 years, the place was padlocked, and these people, the Canadians, lost every penny of their $20 million investment. I went to the Canadian ambassador there. He couldn't do anything. The Chinese ambassador in Ottawa wouldn't do anything, and so these people lost their shirt. You don't hear about these stories, unfortunately. You hear about the success stories, which I don't think there are that many.
One thing I've learned, you raised this earlier, is that a German told me that a lot of the smaller companies that went to China are moving back to Germany, but the big ones, the automakers, can't, because they're told they can't sell their cars unless they make them in China. And I wonder how many of you, maybe some of you will comment on people you know who've tried to gone to China with their eyes wide shut and see what happened to them.
One last point on that. There is a successful Czech company that is doing a successful business in China. It's actually an international company, but started by 2 Czech guys. I'm not going to name it here, but everybody knows, I guess. Since the company is successful China-wide, so in most of provinces, right, shall we believe, according to what you've been telling up to now, shall we believe that this company is also assigned to influence the policy of the Czech government somehow, or the foreign policy of the Czech government? That is assigned to, that is either the Chinese CEO or representatives there in China.
Yeah.
And still, this is the Havel's library, so you have to judge.
Yeah, we have a, how many people, anyone here from Canada? I don't think anybody is.
One.
Yeah, one. Who, what, somebody? Canada? Okay, well, I don't think it's much of a secret that the leader of the Liberal Party in Canada made a declaration that, not one of his wiser moments, he said he admires the way the economy works in China, can turn on a dime because it's a dictatorship. Okay? That's the leader of the opposition in our country. I don't think he's made a number of gaffes like that, but that's probably his stupidest one. Some companies in Canada have done well. Power Corporation is one of them that's done well. But the fact is that most businesses, to my knowledge, have not done well in China, but I defer to the man who lived there.
If you're going to bring up China, if you're going to bring up Canadian companies, it gives me a chance to avoid American companies for a second. Bombardier, that was the last contract that was sitting on my desk before I left China and started working on the book, and I just came back to do interviews and so forth. It was sitting on my desk, and they wanted to build a high-speed rail from, to Lhasa, to Tibet. And I kept it on the corner of my desk. I kept not moving. I kept getting more and more urgent calls from a name I won't mention, but he's in Toronto. And, saying, what are you doing with this? And of course, I didn't want to move it because I looked over the plans, I looked them over briefly, and it was obvious to me it was a military train. Yes, it was a passenger train, but basically they set everything up so that it could be moved out very quickly and you could drive a tank right into it with exact specifications. And of course, when the Tibetans rose up a few years later, that's exactly what happened. And the Bombardier trains were used for that. Now that was considered a huge success story at the time, Bombardier. Remarkable success story. There was almost nothing like it. Cisco had been a huge success story. They countered 80% of the router market in China. Nobody ever had anything like that before. Now they're almost out. I mean, Huawei is dominant. But, so not all of the success stories in China are like that. There are plenty of them that aren't. Kentucky Fried Chicken's not like that, okay? It's fine. But there's enough. And enough of them are either tied directly into Chinese links, and then they get to Chinese motives, national security motives, and those national security motives encompass a much larger world than we understand. And so companies do come in a little bit naively. Bombardier doesn't make military equipment. That's not what they're about. I'm not even sure they really understood this fully. But that's how it ended up getting used. So anyways, that's this is a huge problem for all of us. I don't really have a solution. I'm not the sort of central government type who wants to sort of put somebody in place who will just sort of stop things and make judgments on this. But I'd rather industry sort of policed itself, but I haven't seen a very big example of them doing that.
So I haven't got an answer for my question, but I'll get back to it, don't worry.
I just wondered having seen the film, how did the scenes in the prisons and so much of what was in the film, Courage to Believe, how did it get filmed?
I think I know something about that. A surprising amount of Some of the footage in that movie, I believe, is actually, some of it was sort of smuggled out. There's certain clips and pictures that have been smuggled out. But a lot of it is stuff that was internally kind of published within the Chinese, within China. So it was used for police training and that kind of thing. Now, this is not like Nazi Germany. It's not like they keep this fantastic records and film everything and so forth. But there is enough of that comes out. The other final thing is Harry Wu heroically was able to film some Laogai, some labor camp footage. He snuck back into the labor camps briefly and was able to take some footage, and that footage actually made it out.
Any other question?
Any other comments?
I have a question just about numbers. Do you have any idea how many people are harvested for organs, and let's say a year, and how big part of this is going to West or customers outside China?
Magnus and I estimated it was 41,500 Falun Gong practitioners were harvested or pillaged
That
between.
was 8 years ago, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And your figures are.
My figures for 2000 to 2008 are 65,000 for Falun Gong, and approximately 2,000 to 4,000 Uyghurs, Tibetans, and House Christians combined. I think the figures taper off. We don't have good. Well, first of all, the Chinese have very effectively closed the refugee bleed by rationalizing the passport system in China. So it's very hard to get those kind of figures, well, at least for me, because two things happened. One is they started obviously lying about the numbers. If before there were sort of little slips of the tongue to be found in medical journals and so forth, saying we're doing 10,000 transplants and maybe 3,000 of them were prisoners. You couldn't do this kind of calculation anymore. It became completely state controlled. The second thing is for somebody like me who did all this stuff based on surveys, on a survey method, say 50, I did about 50 refugees to come up with those numbers. That dried up. Those figures simply dried up because we're not getting the refugees. That doesn't mean they're not people being harvested, as I said, just about to be harvested there with 500 other people potentially. But what we have seen is the numbers of actual transplants have apparently not gone down. And this is quite disturbing because that means they have to be coming from somewhere. At the same time, the prison population, regular prisoners, has gone down. So David Modis claims that he thinks the Falun Gong and Uyghur and Tibetan numbers are probably going up. That's his assumption.
You asked a question about where they're going, partly, and we.
They're going to West.
We've learned. We don't know how much they're going to the West, but we have learned since we got here. We've learned a lot of things since we got here. That something like 1 or 2 people have gone from your country for organs, and if it's only a small number, which I'm sure it is, why would it hurt you to pass a law saying that no resident of this country can buy a trafficked organ anyway? You don't have to mention China, because China's the only place that does it in this sense, and make it an offense to be an organ broker. And yeah, there are countries some of them in Asia, by the way, where a lot of people go, and I often use this example of a man who went from, I won't mention the country, but he went for kidneys, and to make a long story a bit shorter, they tried 7 times to give him a kidney before they found one, the 8th one that worked. But as you can imagine, 8 people were killed on order so that this guy could get a kidney that worked. And you could set an example to the world by saying that, going after your MPs or something, to say that you aren't going to allow members of the Czech Republic to go for organs anywhere.
But I think to your point also, look, they are getting, foreign organ tourists are extremely desirable. There's a case, at least, it hasn't been perfectly verified, where somebody paid up to $2 million for an organ. Now that's probably some extremely rich Japanese businessman. I'm sure it's a really out there case. But in most cases, okay, for example, a Chinese guy recently, who I interviewed in Birmingham, England. He's Chinese and he's mainland, and he was able to get a kidney for 3,000 pounds in Xi'an Military Hospital. Now, a foreigner would pay about at least 60 to 70,000 pounds, 60,000 pounds at least right now for the same article, same thing. So you can see that's desirable. You want foreign organ tourists coming in, so it does actually fund it. And you know, they're not, lots of them are from the Middle East. They're from all over. But this is, you know, one of the things that maybe we're not capturing here is that this is an economy. I mean, this is a vast apparatus that has grown up around this thing. And you know, these are just the locations of my book. This is not a comprehensive list in any way. These are just locations I happen to, you know, people read, and it's like any other map that you might show in the beginning of a book. That, you know, here's the places that I'm going to mention. But I think even from that map, you can see that there's a vast infrastructure surrounding this.
Are we talking hundreds or thousands of, you know, illegal organ harvesting, but the organs going to the West patient?
No, I don't think we have a firm figure on that. I think, I want to be perfectly honest, I think organ tourism, Western organ tourism, is the big black hole in this investigation. David Modis and David Kilgour went and interviewed people, but you know, foreign organ tourists are kept at arm's length from the process. So they can go over and have no idea who they're getting. And they usually don't ask because they don't really want to be turned down if you're that desperate. So you don't push very hard on, you know, well, are you sure this isn't a Falun Gong practitioner? Because I'd be very upset. No, that's not going to happen in these situations ever. But I think this is a really huge area for reporters, because there's obviously great human interest stories in this and all the rest of it, and for some reason reporters haven't really been involved. They prefer to sort of hang back on this, even though there's a fairly reasonably easy way of getting to the numbers, which is you just have to have the doctor's confidence and you start tracing those drugs. They have to come back. They have to be kept on maintenance drugs after they come back. And through any system which is at all centralized, you can very easily start tracking that. Now, what you're doing is skirting around patient confidentiality. But of course, we don't accept patient confidentiality for gunshot wounds. We don't accept it if somebody goes off and has sex with an underage prostitute. There's all kinds of cases where we don't accept patient confidentiality at all. But when it comes to the harvesting of political and religious prisoners, patient confidentiality rules. Okay, so this is another reason why I find myself sometimes very irritated. We did earlier today when we were with a medical. We were talking to a medical team. I get irritated when they say, well, you know, we've got these confidentiality rules. This is a real problem. And actually, even if Czech Republic did not change its laws regarding organ tourism, even if they were just to change the confidentiality laws, just tinker with those a little bit on this one subject, they would set a precedent that you would see Spain follow. I bet you'd see Ireland follow, and Scotland, just to humiliate Westminster. And you know, what we're all after, of course, is Berlin. Okay? Berlin changes, all of Europe changes. Okay? So that is, you know, that's where we're at politically.
You don't have any follower? Anybody, so Westerner, who is leading or continuing on investigating that phenomenon in China? So it's stopped by your books, that's it?
There are lots of people. And actually, the people doing the best work are the doctors against forced organ harvesting. They are phenomenal. I wish we could get a doctor from this country that would become part of it too. If you know anybody that would like to do this, please let one of us know, and we'll certainly get his name to DAFO. They have speakers, they have very good pieces that they send out, and they put pressure on governments, legislators. We're actually trying to start one called Parliamentarians Against Forced Organ Harvesting, but the doctors are so far ahead of us that we're not, thus up to now. They're actually sponsoring this, but maybe one of you belongs to a nurses organization or something, and you could start one among your occupation and profession.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't want to make it also negative. I mean, the truth is, there's been some successes here, okay? I mean, there has been a building consensus within the medical community. It's maybe not shared by the people who have the most power in the medical community, but it's shared by a lot of doctors. It's a bit grassroots. I think the consciousness of this thing has changed, has dramatically changed actually certainly since I started going on the road about it, and I'm very impressed by that. And I think people do care about the issue. It's called the imagination. However, it needs this final push, okay? Which is, it needs this final push to go into actual policy.
Já jsem se teda původně jenom čistala, takže... Never mind, but never mind, I had in my mind one question anyway, but I just wasn't sure if I made it to formulate it, nebo jak se to jmenuje. But I'm not able to maybe say it in English correctly, but don't you know the exhibition called Bodies, which was for the Bodies, by the way, twice in our country already, and I'm really, it's horrible, yes, so I think it's maybe a similar issue, isn't it?
So he gives some of his most inspired speeches on this topic. Give me a photo. Give him a full
Is it
blast,
even
please.
in your book?
Yeah, it's chapter, hang on.
I don't have one of them up in this particular presentation, but the final chapter of this book is on that, because I figured it's been such a difficult, depressing book that I thought, I think it was kind of a macabre out there chapter would be the way to go. And yes, I remember when some Falun Gong practitioners from China came to me and said, Ethan, all those bodies in the show, they're all Falun Gong. And I was like, right, that's too good to be true, right? It's too, it's so Edgar Allan Poe, it's very plausible. Let's go back to that map for a second. Something interesting there. There is a hospital right here, Dalian Medical University Hospital. Dalian Medical University Hospital number 2. This is one of the most notorious hospitals for Falun Gong, for Falun Gong practitioners, because they were removing kidneys and livers from this hospital. It's also the mayor of the city at the time was Bo Xilai, who we mentioned earlier, almost became president and so forth. And the police chief was the man we saw in the picture, directing organ harvesting, Wang Lijun. Wang Lijun is operating out of here, the Jinzhou PSB On-Site Psychological Research Center. This is where he removed thousands of organs and got this award for his lethal injection method. Dalian Medical University Hospital number 2, the first plastination factory that Gunther von Hagens created, where they started turning bodies into plastic, is Dalian Medical University Plastination. This, go into the exhibit, judge for yourself. I don't have any proof other than location here. We're talking about exactly the same location. But go and see for yourself. Take a look at some of the exhibits. They're missing their kidneys and their liver. Now, you'd say, well, why, what's the big, well, that could be just chance, but von Hagens is a very particular man. He's very careful about these things. And, he could have put somebody else's kidney and liver, plastic kidney and liver there, but he didn't bother to, or he didn't want to, because he really loves these things. And to him, it's like a classic car. He wouldn't stick the wrong carburetor in an Aston Martin DB5 or something. That'd be my classic car. But so take a look and see for yourself, and see if you think these people in this exhibit are Caucasian, which he claims they are all Caucasian. He says he's thrown out all the Chinese ones, or Chinese. Now, I'm married to an Asian, and to me, I walk in there, I see my wife, okay? And that's all there is to it. But you judge for yourself. But there's a very easy way to determine all this, which is we can do DNA samples. These plastic figures actually contain enough DNA residue so that we can easily determine if they're Caucasian or Asian. That's no problem. But we can even take missing family members and positively or negatively identify them. So I think that's that's where we're at with the body show, and I think it's a, it's a very interesting thing. And the fact is, if you're in a medical school, I would mention that a lot of these bodies have been used as teaching tools. And I know that the Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting would be willing to put them under DNA test.
Nobody tried yet?
No one has tried yet. We've been wanting to, I approached Von Hagens, of course, to ask him if we could have the DNA samples, and they've said no. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next. Yeah, everybody's very afraid of the body shows because they make a lot of money. Okay, they have huge legal teams, and they're very, very ruthless and tough about their legal challenges. Maybe my first instinct was actually to go in with a bunch of doctors and start sawing a hole in the glass cases, and we would go. I wanted to do this in Vienna.
Any more questions, please? I think we have time for, last one. The very last I'll ask, but...
You asked us for more questions, but comments. I have commentary. I think it's not a question about how to save our money in relationship with China, how to save our moral values of Western society, because Tomáš Baťa, it's a Czech, well-known Czech businessman, he said that first, if you corrupt your moral values, so everything follows. Now, then, yes, everything will go down. So you lose money, and officials will be corrupted, and so on. So I think it's a question how to save, in relationship with China, how to save moral values of Western society, and at the end, they are not going to destroy our economy, but if they destroy the moral values of our society, so then will follow destroying of all the society. So that's my...
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. A friend of mine, Ethan's too, practiced law in Shanghai for 14 years. His name is Clive Ansler. I don't know whether he said anything. Yeah, Clive discovered that the rule of law doesn't exist in China. And basically the way it works is that on a Monday, a little group of judges from the local court meet in the basement or someplace, or somebody's office, and they say, this case is coming up on Wednesday, the decision will be this, the penalty will be that. So people who walk into these courtrooms in China, perhaps some of you have done it, think they're watching a real trial proceeding, but in fact, what's said in court has no influence on the judgment, and the judge at the end simply gets up and reads what he's been told to say. How many of you are aware of that? That's how the rule of law works in China. Were any of you aware of that? Well, I was astounded when I heard it. The other thing that bothered Ansley enough that he left China, he's back in Canada now, was that something went out, I think it was an email to all of the 200,000 judges in China, telling them that no foreigner would win again in future in the courts in China. And the final thing that might be of interest is that the Chief Justice of China, if I'm not mistaken, has never been to law school. He's a former policeman. I mean, so what does that say about the party is above the law, and anyone who goes there thinking it's going to be just like this country or Canada or the US, I mean, it's crazy. So maybe you should tell people in this country that that's what they're dealing with when they go over there, plus all the enormous corruption.
But I have no objection to people. I mean, how could I, as somebody who sort of went to do this myself, have an objection to people going over and getting their hands dirty in China a little bit? I don't reject that concept. People ask me about going to China. Should I go to China? Well, of course you should. It's a fantastic country. Right? Amazing people, incredibly creative. You know, if Beijing were to reform, if Beijing changed, I'd be back there in a heartbeat. Pollution and everything, okay? You know, my favorite city in the whole world. To me, there's no question that you know, China does have this very potentially promising future. But I do feel that this is, and it's rare in this world, that you see sort of, you know, good and evil kind of playing out in this kind of dramatic a way. But this is This is good news. I don't know how else to describe it. This is what I kept running across.
All right, so I'm going to ask my very last question, which is, like I said before, shall we, if we know now that doing business with the Chinese or in China also contains some of the practices we don't like, that the foreign companies might be even accomplices in this terrible illegal organ harvesting. Now, what are the proper questions a journalist should ask so that at the end of the road he or she knows or can assume that this or that particular company is indeed involved in some unethical or illegal activities?
I'll give a very quick answer to that. There's a very simple, Arnie Schwartz is this researcher who comes out. He's a software engineer kind of geek guy, so very smart, very good. He really had no experience in investigative reporting or anything like it. He's just very systematic. He went on the web, he doesn't speak any Chinese, he used Google Translate. He's the one who came up with the whole Roche investigation. Sitting in his computer in Switzerland, I've seen the computer, to me it's kind of historic. He's the one who came up with the fact that an English company was building a medical, had a pitch out to build a medical city in Dalian, the place that we were just talking about, the epicenter of organ harvesting, right? That was going to have an organ harvesting center. This is an architectural firm in the UK. He was the one who came up with the fact that the Pfizer, maybe some of you have heard of this company, they invented Viagra. They're rather large in the United States. And he was the one who discovered they were going into China to do transplant drugs as well. When he revealed that, I mean, Pfizer, to its credit, had the shortest time I've ever seen on clinical trials. They were in and out 9 months. They were supposed to be there for 2 years. They each changed history with that. And he didn't even know what he was doing. He didn't even have the proper sort of journalist tools to do this. He's not really a great writer. He just sort of gives this stuff over to other people. I think there's plenty of room. I think that's what's needed here, okay? Is to shine, for people to shine a light. And sometimes people ask me, well, what can I do, what can I do? It's not a question of Facebook and signing petitions. I mean, sometimes it is, but a lot of this is about, there are people out in this room who can do this kind of thing. They know Czech, I know what Czech. They know what Czech companies are thinking. They know what people are looking for in opportunities in China. There are all kinds of opportunities. These are huge opportunities for not just reporters, but for anyone who is a bit curious and has a bit of a nose for this. That's my, I mean, I don't mean to put down the other things, the social activism and so forth, but this is the real currency of the realm here. Knowledge is power in this case, and I ultimately believe it will win. So.
David, comment. You like comments, so you comment.
No, I would say, sorry to do this to you, I didn't know this comment. I've said it.
Okay, so thank you very much, both of you. Gutmann,
Thank you.